Every once in a while, you really have to dig back in the old tackle box to find a lure that'll catch fish when others won't. Hi there, welcome to the Bass Fishing Life. I'm your host, Steve Rogers. Before we get into the video, make sure hit the subscribe button and click that notification bell. That way, every Tuesday and Thursday, you'll get alerts when our new posts show up. So make sure that you do that. I really appreciate it. You know, there are times of the year when fishing gets really difficult, and it seems like no matter what we could throw Carolina rigs and shaky heads, and then we can even do finesse presentations like drop shots and Ned rigs and all this type of stuff, and just sometimes it seems like the bass are in a position that makes it very difficult to get a bite, especially when those fish are at those mid to deeper depth ranges, and if they are suspended. Suspended bass are some of the most difficult to catch, especially for anglers that are just learning how to bass fish. But there is a lure out there that has worked for many, many decades, and a lot of the pros still use it on a regular basis. But it's kind of a tight-lipped type of a thing, and a lot of anglers have forgot about it. That particular bait is a Flutter Spoon. Now, this is a small version of a Flutter Spoon. Some of the anglers out there, especially in the pro circuits, will use 4, 5, 6, 7, even 8-inch Flutter Spoons. They are huge, but this is a little bit smaller one, and I've had great success with this. There are a lot of different ones out there on the marketplace. Now, a Flutter Spoon is meant to imitate a bait fish of some sort, whether that's a minnow or it's a shad or some other sort of prey fish that is dying and falling through the water column. So that's what a Flutter Spoon does. There are two different ways that I like to fish it or present it. The first is around floating docks. A Flutter Spoon is absolutely killer around floating docks when those bass are suspended in that mid range. Now, I'm not giving you an actual depth like 15 feet, 30 feet, whatever, because every lake and reservoir, mid-ranges and deep water are different. On my home lake, this water gets down to 60, 70, even 80 feet deep in some places. Another lake or reservoir, the deepest it might get is 30 feet. So mid-range and a deep range are really dependent on the bodies of water that you are fishing. But when I'm fishing suspended bass around boat docks, and those bass are hanging about halfway between the top, right underneath those floats, and all the way down in the bottom, a Flutter Spoon can be magical. Now, in that situation, I will go ahead and pitch that spoon, much like I would a jig, but the key is to let it fall on a slack line. That spoon has to have no resistance to it as far as coming back to your rod and reel. It's got to be in a completely slack line, and it will flutter down, and you need to keep an eye on that line, absolutely an intense focus on that line, because a bass that is suspended might just vacuum that thing up and just sit there. You won't feel a bump. You might not even see a twitch in the line. The line will just stop dropping or stop sinking. So if you're fishing boat docks in 40 foot of water, and all of a sudden you think, well, wait a minute, I can't be all the way down to the bottom. Guess what? Set the hook. A friend of mine that I have fished with, a guide down on Lake Norfolk, we were down there doing some striper fishing television shows, and he loves to use jigging spoons, and or Flutter Spoons for big stripers. And we were fishing schools of stripers in 80 to 90 foot of water, and the tough thing is with those stripers, unlike a largemouth or a smallmouth, they can't just sit and hang in one place. They're always moving to keep that water pushing through their gills. So it can be difficult to stay on those schools. But he said he had a client out one time, and they were fishing real deep, And the client's like, well, is there a tree or something down here? I'm stuck, my spoon's not dropping. And the guide, he said, whoa, set the hook, you've got one, you've got one. And that striper had just pulled that thing in and wasn't moving. So that's just an interesting tidbit of what can happen when you are using a flutter spoon. Now, the other place where I like to use a flutter spoon is out offshore. When I find on my graph, when I find suspended bass out in those mid ranges and those deep ranges, and in that type of situation, instead of pitching the spoon out, I'm most likely going to be doing a vertical jigging presentation. There's still situations if I'm working a big tapering point that I might cast that thing out and then bring it back to the boat. But a lot of times I'm going to be using a vertical jigging presentation. Now, as far as the presentation goes, when I've got that rod, and let's say I'm fishing it down vertical and I'm letting it drop, flutter down, flutter down, flutter down, and if I don't get a hit on the way down and my spoon hits the bottom, I'm going to pop it twice and pop it really hard. Now I'm going to show you how I like to pop that spoon. So I'll hold my rod and take my other hand here on the butt of the rod and I'll pop, pop, hit it twice, boom, boom, hit it twice really hard. Just like that. I'll push down on that rod to really make that spoon jump off of the bottom. Your strikes are going to come in two different places, either on the drop, where I get a lot of them, or on that pop, pop. They're going to the bass are going to react to that, and then boom, they're going to hit it right at that particular point. So back to the dock fishing. If I'm fishing a dock, I'll pitch it out there, let it sink, and in that situation, I'm just going to give it, boom, one big puller pop, because it comes back to the boat, let it sink back down on a slack line, go ahead and pop it up one more time, let it sink back down on a slack line. If I am fishing more offshore, more vertical, that's when I'm going to be giving it two pops just like that. But with any different lures and presentations, go ahead and try some different things on your own. You might find something that works really well for you and for the fish on the particular body of water that you are on. As far as the line goes for flutter spoon fishing, I have found, for me personally, I prefer straight fluorocarbon because it does not have any stretch to it. And when I'm dealing with a slack line type of a presentation and the fish grabs it, I want to eliminate that stretch. Now, I have used regular mono before and I've caught fish, and I've used braided line with a fluoro leader, but I found, for me, I like to use straight fluoro on this type of a presentation. So there are other ways to do it. That is just the way that I have found it's been most effective for my particular fishing style. As far as times of year, the flutter spoon is something that is very versatile and it's going to work throughout the year. But my number one favorite time to fish it is when things start to get really difficult in that mid to late summer, when those fish really pull offshore, and then through the early fall when those bass are still kind of gathered up and out offshore before they start to move up shallow and really get that fall feeding frenzy on. So that midsummer to early fall is where I will throw a flutter spoon a lot, or any time when it just seems I cannot get bit on anything else, I'll go ahead and I will pull one out. Now you might think, well, why don't you fish one more often? Well, that's kind of the catch-22 of bass fishing. There are so many great ways to catch fish that each of us have our favorites, and that tends to be what we stick with. But the flutter spoon needs to be one that you do put into your arsenal, your bag of tricks. The other thing that is really awesome about a bait like this is when you find a bass or a group of bass, a flutter spoon is one of those lures and one of those presentations that can get the entire school fired up. It is not unusual when spoon fishing, when you find a school of bass, to catch 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 fish off of one spot. And as a matter of fact, the action can almost be every single drop, Every time that spoon drops, when that school is fired up, you're going to pull one back to the boat. And you may be able to work that school over for 10, 15 minutes, and then the bite's going to stop, and you've got to move on and find a fresh group of fish or a new group of fish. But the fishing can really be fast and furious, and for whatever reason, a flutter spoon tends to, in my opinion, catch a little bit better quality of fish. So maybe if you were catching 3-pounders, you're going to catch 4s. If you were catching 4s, you're going to catch 5s. I don't know what the reason for that is. It just seems to be, that's what I have experienced, okay? But the flutter spoon is something that I promise you that your great-granddaddy or granddaddy, they fished for a long time with a lot of success. They probably still have them in their tackle boxes, and there's a lot of them, different models out there on the marketplace today. So go ahead and pick one up, mess around with it a little bit, and I think you're going to be surprised. And the other interesting thing is it's a lure and a technique that is not overly difficult. So new bass anglers can go ahead and give this a try and have success without too much of a learning curve. So I hope this really helps you out. Hey, speaking of helping people out, make sure that you encourage someone today. You never know what a difference you're going to make in their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.